Well, yesterday, US President Donald Trump announced a 30% tariff on all South African goods entering the United States, effective from August the 1st. So, what are South Africa's options now, and what's happening inside the government's engine room? We're joined by Professor Theo Venter from Northwest University. So, Professor Venter, thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So South Africa seemed to have thought it's still had time, and then suddenly this announcement by Trump. So, what happened? Was Trump done waiting?
I want to take two views, one from America to South Africa and one from South Africa to America. In the US, the president signed 14 letters. All those letters were exactly the same. It's only the address and the number that differed. Whether the letter went to Japan or South Korea or South Africa, same story. We received a 30% tariff for goods, and Japan 25, which surprised me. Indonesia got very much the same as we did, and a few other countries. So now looking from South Africa to America, there's not a chance that South Africa can trade or negotiate with the US on an even keel, so-called reciprocal trade. America is big and we are small. We are less than 1% of the global economy. So we had to make certain trade offerings to the Americans in the last month or two. There was some serious ongoing negotiations I'm aware of. South Africa had to make certain provisions that the Americans can export more chicken to South Africa, and we stood fast on poultry. Our poultry, of course, is chicken, but on some other products, we had to make certain. We agreed, but if you trade with such a big market, it's better, in my view, to have access to a market with tariffs than to have zero access to markets, even though there are no tariffs. Let me give you an example. We are trading with India. India has got a 51% tariff on all agricultural goods that go from South Africa to India. But we serve with India in BRICS. There are tariffs on our goods going to China. We serve in BRICS with China. So it's a world in which one has to take a very, very clear view and have to look at things in a balanced way. The other view that you'll get in South Africa is that the Americans are actually taking us on politically. I don't think they're taking us on politically. I think this is hard-nosed trade, where you're trading with a very big player, the largest economy in the world, and there is no way that you can trade on even keel with such a big economy. It's a different story between Britain and America. There, I think there's a historical tie, and there are other things that came to mind in the negotiations. But even if you look at Vietnam, and Vietnam got two tariffs, a 20% tariff if it's manufactured in Vietnam, a 40% tariff if things are going from China to Vietnam, from Vietnam to America, because the Americans know that's what the Vietnamese are doing, and the Chinese know that the Americans know that's what they are doing. So I think we are up to a very hard-nosed trading regime that is different for everybody. There's nobody in the world at the moment that can escape this. I think what we have seen now with the letters going out, and more letters are going out, we are looking at a global trade reset. We are not looking at a few changes. We are looking at a reset. So your mindset, now again, speaking as a South African, your mindset shouldn't be to be mad at the Americans, or to have battles, or to have this or that political battle or axe to grind. The approach, I think, is to think rationally about what's going on, to export to the Americans where we can, and where we can do it where there's affordability in that thing, and where it is not, to open new markets. And for South Africa, I think this reset means looking at the world differently and looking at different markets. Already, We're exporting more than 40% of all our agricultural products into Africa. Why only 40%? We can increase that. What we lose on the American side, we can, as a country, as a sector, we can move into other continents and open other markets. So that's how I think one should deal with the reset, rather than to have all these political battles, because you hear this all over the place.
So you don't think it's linked to the South Africa's stance on BRICS?
Yeah, there's a fascinating little interview with President Ramaphosa when he finished BRICS on his way back, because on his way back, he's not only going to have to deal with tariffs, he's also going to have to deal with some turmoil in the police, because but that's a totally different story. So he's got a full program returning. But on that little interview, he said, it can't be right that if you've got all the power in the world, what you do is right. Well, I've got news for President Ramaphosa. That's exactly how China operates. That's exactly how the Americans operate, and so on. And then he spoke about the United Nations, and he said it's time for the United Nations to change, especially the Security Council. Now, I'll get back to trade just now. The 5 permanent members include 2 members of BRICS, Russia and China. And they don't want the Security Council to change. Although BRICS would like to have it, they don't want to have it, but they're all in BRICS. So it's a fascinating kind of situation that you have with BRICS. And then Donald Trump came on top of it, and he said, those BRICS members, and BRICS just allowed a new member, Indonesia. So it means that with Indonesia, the amount of people and the amount of the global GDP that BRICS now represents is fairly significant. It's more than half of the globe, although the economic muscle sits in the G20, not in BRICS. In BRICS, you've got the population and the GDP. But the 10%, you said, if you want to be more anti-American, and if you want to change the global the function of the dollar as the currency, the global currency, I'm going to slap a 10% on you. And I think he hasn't done that with South Africa, but I think that's one of the risks we, as a small player in the BRICS environment and in the G20 environment, will have to take note of seriously, because it means, and that letter allows for it, that the tariff can be up or down. And in some cases, I think we may see over time where the tariff comes down, because a tariff is a tax. I know we call it a tariff, but for the Americans, it's a tax, because a product arrives at American port at $100 if it comes from South Africa, and then the state, the American government, adds $30 on top of that $100, and then the American consumer will have to deal with a product that is now $130. So who's paying for it? The Americans are paying for it in the form of a tax, where it feels as if they're taking South Africa to task. They're hitting us with a tariff which they are paying. And Milton Friedman was very, very cute on tariffs years ago, where he said a tariff is a tax that at first it looks like a major new income stream, but over time it creates inflation and it comes at a huge cost. That the Americans will have to discover themselves.
Well, the U.S. Trade Secretary Scott Bessent said this is make or break and not a new deadline. Is that how South Africa sees it?
One must distinguish between what the politicians are saying, let's say the sound in the echo chamber, what's being said, and what happens on the ground. It is my view that there's an ongoing discussion between America and a lot of its partners, which includes South Africa. Of course, in the case of South Africa, there are other issues which we have discussed in the past, Afrikaner refugees and expropriation without compensation. I think those things declined in terms of its importance. But what hasn't declined has been our relationship with the Americans. We still don't have an ambassador. We've got a special envoy appointed, but I'm not sure whether he has been in America yet, Msebezi Jonas. That is still up in there, I don't know. But I think that there will be ongoing negotiations, and I think there will be ongoing discussions. And I'm sure the Americans will, in terms of certain basic benchmarks, see to trade. And what I said in my previous answer, and that is, over time, a tariff becomes a tax, and the people paying for those taxes are aware that things are getting more expensive. And we live in a world where everything is connected to everything, and we know where it's coming from, what it's cost, and all those kind of things. And in that sense, I think that over time, these tariffs will slowly but surely find the right place. The world is full of tariffs. That's why the World Trade Organization in the beginning was formed, to see if we can equalize trade a little bit more among trading partners. And Trump caused the reset. We must now manage the reset.
There were some exemptions that South Africa was talking about. Do you think they're still on the table?
The exemption South Africa had was under the AGOA legislation. And the AGOA legislation allowed for zero tariffs on motor vehicles, on agricultural goods, and a few other products that was specifically listed. We must remember that all strategic minerals in South Africa are zero listed. And we once had one or two voices from within the ANC. One was Gweri Mantashe. When the tariffs was announced, he said, like almost shooting from the hip, that in that case we'll just increase the price of manganese or iron ore or whatever. Now that letter that you spoke about in the beginning said, if in this 30% tariff regime you are going to add a number, any number, on any product, we will reciprocate. We will do exactly the same on the tariff. So it will go from 30 to 31 or 32 or 34. So basically they say to us, keep your stuff as it is. There's about 75 specific minerals or combination of minerals, chemicals that are not rated in any way, but I think the AGOA legislation is basically dead. It still exists because AGOA was created by Congress and not by the president, and it can only be stopped by Congress. And there's legislation currently before the House to review AGOA, and I think when it must be reviewed or renewed by September this year, I think South Africa will be out of AGOA. So we're losing that advantage.
Mr. Trump warned the countries not to retaliate. Is that on the cards for South Africa?
Yeah, that's why I said earlier on, that letter basically said, if you retaliate, we will retaliate on your retaliation with exactly the same number. So don't even think about it. You can only say that if you're very, very powerful and big. And that's exactly what the Americans are doing. And I think the only country that can deal with them at that level is probably China. Somebody said to me, it's as if the Americans and the Chinese are on the same boat out at sea, and the Americans started shooting holes in the boat. So the Chinese said, well, then we will also do it. And they started shooting holes in the boat. So that's what is called a reset. We will have to allow this. And that's why I'm saying, when you're a small country, when you're a subject, you have to look at things very, very rationally and see whether you can open different markets or whether you can restore the poor relationship. And we've got a bad relationship with the Americans at the moment. And in the case of South Africa, and I'm now talking when as a South African looking outside, I think it's high time that foreign policy becomes the foreign policy of the government of national unity and not of the dominant party in that union, the ANC. Currently, we're dealing with ANC foreign policy. We're not dealing with the foreign policy of the government of national unity. And that change will have to come sooner rather than later, because the Americans will watch us.
Well, what else needs to happen with trade policy?
Well, with trade policy, it is currently under review in the Government of National Unity, and it's a pity that in one of our previous discussions we spoke about Deputy Minister Whitfield. He was part of that trade policy team that got fired overnight by the president, which prerogative he will probably have to use with the Minister of Police very soon, but we will have that one. That is a fairly well-established, good team, and I think trade policy will be reviewed continuously. But what happened to our advantage is that a lot of sectors came together and they spoke about a common problem, which is American tariffs. And they started talking to each other. Sectors such as the vehicle industry, the agricultural industry, and so on and so on and so on. So there's an advantage in that, and there's an advantage in the team that developed some good skills in their negotiations with the Americans.
How do you think this would pan out?
I think we will see American tariffs at the levels we have them for a long time, at least in the next year, maybe 2 years. And the way in which our government is going to respond is going to impact on our local political scene, where people are going to say the Government of National Unity failed us based on what happened with tariffs. And some people will say in the United States that we went overboard with this tariff war because the big thing that Donald Trump wanted to provide Americans is a lowering of general costs, of household costs, to make life cheaper. I don't think tariffs are going to contribute to that. I think the Americans will also have to deal with an inflation problem over time, and that is why the American Federal Reserve did not lower rates, because they were much more cautious, saying we'll have to look at this tariff thing over time, because it's only over time that we will be able to measure what kind of impact it will have. We can't do that in a day or two, or like Trump wanted, immediate. So I think for the foreseeable future, I would say the medium term, the next year and a half, this reset will have to, in a way, find its lay and where it's going. But I don't see changes soon, especially going to the lower end of tariffs. I think it will stay where it is.
So you don't think South Africa is suddenly going to say, okay, zero tariffs for the US, and you're going to see Jeeps driving around in South Africa competing with local manufacturers?
No, and that is where part of the American letter is correct. We have certain things. For instance, we had barriers for poultry. We had barriers for pork. And those things were renegotiated, and South Africa gave in on some of those issues. We will now get more American poultry. It may put our chicken industry or poultry industry in trouble, but I think they're resilient and they've got the ability to get out of it fairly soon. But I mean, it's a give and take. But on some issues, the South African government did not give in to American pressure, and then in those cases, they will have to search for new markets.
And how will investors and the businesses in South Africa see this? More jitters?
Well, businesses are looking very carefully at this policy changes that you asked me previously about. Businesses will look at how would South Africa deal with something like Elon Musk. Not his political party, that's an American domestic problem, but whether he can get Starlink into South Africa and under what conditions. And that is what they're looking, because there's a lot of opportunities here. And if we develop, you see, there are two things happening in South Africa. We have the president saying that Black economic empowerment is a fixture, it won't change, it has worked, it has brought about transformation. I think he's broadcasting on Channel 1, when he says that. He's broadcasting to his own supporters and his own party and those keeping his hands behind his back. On Channel 2, he's saying, guys, please invest in South Africa. We will be flexible. But the people of Channel 1 also listen to Channel 2. And the people of Channel 2 can also hear Channel 1. So it's almost a contradictory kind of thing, but that's how developing democracies work. You've got these two voices. And if you've got a long-term view on the support and the growth of the South African economy, you will invest. It took 30 years for people to invest and to become kind of involved in Zimbabwe again. And slowly but surely, some elements of the Zimbabwean economy is picking up. So it takes a long time. I don't think we have gone down to that level, but I think slowly but surely we need to get rid of Channel 2 and broadcast everything on Channel 1 so that everybody can hear and people don't have to manage this paradoxical situation where you say one thing but you do another thing, and it's confusing.
Well, Professor Theo Venter, thanks so much.
My pleasure.